and along with Dawn today, we have Sarah Emond, who's going to, she's the VP, the executive VP, the EVP of and Chief Operating Officer of ICER, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, which is one of the country's leading evidence-based generation groups out there. And looking forward to hearing from both of you. Handing the virtual microphone off to you, Dawn. Thank you both for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. Sarah, are you with me?
Here, Don. Great to see you.
Yeah, nice letting the audience know we're meeting each other for the first time, but that's all right. So welcome. And I think we're all interested in hearing more about ICER and what you do. Maybe you could give a brief introduction.
Oh, it would be my pleasure. And thanks for having me. It's great to be with all of you today. Yes, ICER, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, is a nonprofit research organization that conducts research to help the healthcare system know what a fair price is for what we pay for in healthcare. This is something that's typically done in developed countries by the government because they have single payer healthcare systems. Well, we have a uniquely American healthcare system. We do not have a single payer, and our nonprofit that doesn't have any regulatory authority or no power except to really inform this national conversation about how we pay for healthcare with limited resources. And so our work is rooted in seeing what the evidence of a new drug or a new intervention does in terms of benefiting patients, and then translating that into what we call a health benefit price benchmark, again, to help the ecosystem know what we're getting with what we're paying for and where the price chosen by the manufacturer aligns or does not align with the price that matches the benefit that patients receive.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate that background. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more. It sounds like you've got a nice mix of economists and clinical folks, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about how you go about it, and where does the role of actuaries play in, because we've had actuaries for a long time, versus maybe what you're doing, and maybe you're using a combination of actuarial information as well as economists. So, but talk about a little bit more about the mechanics and the professionals that pull this together.
Certainly. We do have clinicians and economists, as our name might lead you to believe, right? Clinical and economic review, but we don't have one actuary. Actuaries are more about, and this is where I'm outside of my depth, helping predict where a particular budget, a health insurance budget, might go. How expensive will it be to take care of this many people? What kind of premiums do I need to charge in order to support that? Our work is actually starts with the evidence that's generated, if it's a new drug, by the manufacturer, and how well have they been able to show what benefit patients receive from that drug, and how much better is that than what we're already doing now. And so our team are clinicians, doctors, pharmacists, health economists, people with expertise in pharmacoeconomics, and then we have an army of people who are expert in stakeholder engagement, because a huge part of our work is making sure that those who would ultimately benefit from access, the patients and their families, are at the center of the work that we do. And so we have patient engagement, manufacturer engagement, people who have a long expertise in knowing how to bring sometimes disparate parts of the healthcare system together to have these really tough conversations.
So Sarah, when we use the word benefit, benefit's a big, broad word. So we can talk about economic benefit to the payer. We can talk about economic benefit to the consumer.
That's right.
We can talk about clinical benefit. Does it work better, faster? Maybe better, faster, cheaper. Are the side effects better, faster, less, more, etc.? Those are all other versions of benefits. We can talk about convenience. Sometimes even now, especially with a variety of digital combination products, we can talk about feedback loops and data and how that plays into the equation. And so certainly we can talk about the economic impact onto the health plan. But if we were talking to an employer, they might want to know what's the economic impact on my productivity. So when you use the word benefit, it doesn't seem like it describes very much by itself.
Well, Don, I'm going to hire you because you basically touched on all of it. And those, I mean, you're touching on the really important parts of what we mean when we talk about benefits. So let me break it down. We start with comparative clinical effectiveness. It's the very first question we ask. Is this new drug any better than what we're doing now? If you get an answer that says no, you can kind of stop there because you're like, okay, then let's keep doing what we're doing. We don't need to ask the question, how much should we pay for this added benefit of a new drug if it's no better than what we're already doing? But what we see from the amazing innovation coming from the biopharmaceutical industry is most of the time there's a benefit, and it's helping patients weather the things you mentioned with fewer side effects and better ease of administration. Perhaps it's a pill instead of an infusion. If you're a rural patient, that means a huge difference in your quality of life because you're not driving 3 hours to get your infusion every day. And you can put all of that together. And what if it was a life-limiting condition? You'd want to know if it extended your life. You put that all together and you can talk about the clinical benefit for patients. What cost effectiveness does is it adds one step to that conversation. It says, how much more are we paying for that benefit? But the more we're paying can come from a bunch of different perspectives, right? It can come from the health system. So are we paying for a new drug? Great. Are there new tests associated with the drug? How much would that cost? Well, are there savings? Because we'd want to capture that too. What if this new drug avoids hospitalizations? Well, that drug should get credit for that. And so you add all of that up on the cost side from the health system perspective, and then you can have this ratio to talk about how much more we're paying for the benefit. But what you hit on is really important. There are things beyond that that matter a lot to patients, caregivers, employers, and other stakeholders. It could be productivity. It could be caregiver impact. My gosh, everyone's been talking about Alzheimer's for the last 3 weeks, right? The impact that an effective treatment could have on caregivers is almost incalculable. But we take a shot at calculating that, and it's rooted in talking to the patients themselves and their caregivers to make sure we understand what additional benefits come from a new intervention that may not have been captured in that clinical benefit, that clinical trial. And so we're able to inform policymakers about these other aspects, other benefits, contextual considerations that are really, really important when judging the overall value of a new intervention.
So that's interesting, especially given the Alzheimer's discussion that just kind of went through the roof in the last week. I suppose there's the possibility that a reduced requirement on caregivers could offset the cost of the drug.
It could, if we had a drug that was actually slowing cognitive decline and could demonstrate an improvement in the quality of life of the caregivers, that would be important to capture. And in the review we're doing right now of aducanumab, we have captured that piece of the impact on caregivers. And we've even studied it to see how big a benefit would we need to see in order to have some offsets in terms of the intervention costs and then the benefit that would accrue to patients and their families. So that's
talk a little bit about the ICER business model. Who hires you and how does that work?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit. We're funded almost entirely by nonprofit foundations. So philanthropy is our business model, and it's really important to us to have that be the source of our research funding so we can maintain our independence. We do take funding from manufacturers and health plans to run a policy summit every year where we try to tackle a really big issue in health policy, whether it's rebates or how to pay for gene therapies. But that money doesn't support our research because we think it's really important that the money that does come in to support our research comes only from nonprofit foundations.
So where do you get your ideas about what you should research? Does that come from industry, from payers? Who brings you your list, and how do you sort through what's the priority?
Yeah, great question. So our horizon scanning and topic selection process includes all of that. We get nominations from the public. It can come from patients, it can come from manufacturers, it can come from health plans, it really could come from everyone. But we have a really robust team that actually looks at the pipeline and says, what's coming down the pike? What are people really excited about in terms of a new mechanism of an action or a drug that might impact a large population? And we go through a process, an internal topic selection group, and we have an internal topic selection criteria that we run through when we decide what a new topic will be. We do a lot of our research on new drugs because it is what's driving a lot of the conversation about value and access in the healthcare system, but we also do research on things outside of the drug space. And those nominations often come actually from employers about what's keeping them up at night, paying for low back pain or community health workers or integrating behavioral health into primary care.
How about, as we've seen just a huge number of new healthcare service delivery models, especially in the virtual first arena. Have you started looking at the actual delivery of healthcare and how people actually access it as opposed to a drug?
We have, and let me tell you, those reports have been so interesting, but haven't had a lot of impact. And I'm not entirely sure why. I think sometimes it might be that we're a little too soon. So integrating behavioral health into primary care was an example. On its face, everyone's like, yes, we should do this. Of course, we should do this. And there were several models that we looked at that had varying degrees of success in terms of meeting endpoints that were important to patients. And yet the uptake of that has been, I would say, uneven. And some are doing it a different way and maybe not using the best practice, but something that is more homegrown. I think health system delivery change is really, really hard. The other one we did a couple of years ago was outpatient palliative care. So what we know about palliative care, and this is a few years ago, is that it's usually introduced once somebody's hospitalized with a very serious condition, not quite at hospice, but they want to be thinking about their palliative needs. And there was a huge benefit to introducing patients to a palliative care team at the time of diagnosis. Even if life expectancy was years, it doesn't need to happen only when something's terminal, but it helped with their quality of life and managing their pain. And yet, not a huge uptake of that. I think that level of change is really difficult. I think the reimbursement model is behind why it's really hard to see change in health systems. And I do hope that the move to capitation and accountable care organizations is getting us to a place where health systems are seeing those investments as worthwhile.
What do you think about some of the new trends that we're seeing pop up fairly regularly, like paying health plan members to switch to a cheaper drug, a biosimilar, for example, and actually putting an economic incentive on the table?
Oh, complicated is what I think about that. Now, using economic incentives to get certain behavior about choosing drugs has been around for a long time. That's what a formulary is, right? Your tier 1 with 0 or low copay, or your generics and preferred products. You get your tier 2 preferred brands, and then you got your non-preferred. You've got different cost sharing to try to incentivize patients to get to the other option. I think if you're thinking about the recent example we've heard for a particular psoriasis drug, I think what's challenging about the recent example of sort of incentivizing patients with a $500 credit card, gift card, is that those were patients who were choosing already to stay on the therapy, even though it became non-preferred by their plan. And that means that they and their doctors had a long conversation about staying on a therapy that was working for them, even if it might mean more out of pocket for them. And so I think there were potentially some misaligned incentives there about what we were trying to get in terms of behavior. I think that type of economic incentive makes a lot of sense for first starts, for new starts. But you said biosimilar. I am fascinated to see what kind of economic incentives the health plans will start using for that, because we know that the data are really strong on the clinical equivalency of these biosimilars, and that yet we haven't had a lot of uptake. And so will we start seeing more economic incentives to try to get people to switch? I would predict that we will, but I'm not sure how successful they're going to be, because people feel, especially with these very serious chronic conditions, if they're good, if they're stable on therapy, it's going to take a lot for them to change, because sometimes they have to go through 2, 3, 4 biologics to find the one that works for them. And it's the last thing they want to do is start over with something new.
On completely the other end of the spectrum, we had a really interesting announcement last week where Amazon came out and said, we'll give you 6 months for $6 on generics. So are we seeing drug costs going to 0? What's that going to do?
I don't know. But that's generics, right? And generics should be really cheap, because the social contract is that we pay a monopoly price when we're rewarding the innovator. And when we're not, we should be paying when that period is over, society gets the deal of having really cheap generics. I think that we've squeezed about as much as we can out of the savings in the generic space. And so we really have to pay attention to how we're pricing branded pharmaceuticals.
I think we're on the verge of getting drugs for free, at least from Amazon. So thank you, Sarah, so much. This was great. I really appreciate the chance to share with the audience what ICER's up to and what they're doing. And congratulations on the great work.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure to be with you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn, once again for appearing on the symposium today. And for those of you who follow the symposia series, you know that Dawn is a regular every month on the program. And again, for those of you who don't follow the symposium on a monthly basis, we are coming to you live from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time every third or fourth Thursday. Of course, next month we will be on the fourth Thursday of July. And thank you again, Don and Sarah.